Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with jazz pianist and composer Billy Childs. He just released an impressive new CD, 2017's Rebirth. Billy was groomed in L.A. and attended the USC Community School of the Performing Arts, earning a Bachelor of Music degree in composition under the tutelage of Linn. Then he was discovered by trumpet legend Freddie Hubbard, landing a record deal with the Windham Hill Records in 1988. He has played with folks all over the map: Yo-Yo Ma, Sting, Renee Fleming, the Los Angeles Philharmonic, the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, Corea, the Kronos Quartet, Wynton Marsalis, and he's quite popular as a composer in his own right. So please, get to know Billy and dig this interview, my friends.
Billy, thank you for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Oh, no problem.
Before we get started with everything here, I want to just kind of get a general idea of what's been going on with you lately.
What's been going on? Man, that's a loaded question. Wow. You know, actually, I came to the end of a long period. I came to the end a couple of weeks ago of a long period of having like about a year and a half of always having something to compose. So that was great, you know. I had for the past year and a half, I had some deadline or another that I had to finish. Sometimes I had 4 at the same time, sometimes just one, but always I had something hanging over my head that I needed to complete. And I just finished this choral piece for the LA Master Chorale, and that was kind of the last thing I had to do for a while. So I feel a little, relieved, but then also that anxious feeling of okay, now what's next, And so that was kind of it. But also in between all of that, I've been, playing a lot and Rebirth, the album that came out, and all of that, has been going on. It's been crazy.
So talk to me about Rebirth. It's your newest album. It's a great listen. I want to get kind of an idea of how you feel about it and what went into making this album.
Well, I mean, I feel really good about it for a lot of reasons. It's kind of named that Claudia Acuna and I came up with the title, and it's kind of appropriate for a few reasons. It was kind of a rebirth of me going back to a small group format, I suppose. I had been doing for the past maybe 10, 15 years these kind of expanded projects, kind of with lofty ideas, like my jazz chamber ensemble, which is piano, bass, drums, acoustic guitar, harp, and sax with a string quartet. And I did 2 albums of that. I had a lot of classical commissions that I was doing. I had a Laura Nero project that I did with a multitude of singers and instrumentalists, and the jazz chamber nucleus. That kind of, it was nice to go back to playing and writing for a small group format. Kind of the lean instrumentation gave me a lot more opportunity to just play the piano, which I discovered I missed doing, to that degree. That was kind of what went into making it. That was the motivation. It's let's return to this. And plus I wanted to return to some of the songs that I had done back in the days when I was doing that, in the late 80s and early 90s when I was with Windham Hill Jazz and later with Stretch Records and Shawnee Records. I did that a lot more, and I wanted, and a lot of the Windham Hill records are out of print. You can't get them on iTunes or Amazon unless they're used or something. And I wanted to redo some of those tunes and recast them with this new personnel. So that was kind of all of that went into making it.
Right on. So talk to me about your childhood in Los Angeles. How did you get into jazz and get to this point where you've had a career in jazz?
I just turned 60 years old in March. When I was growing up, jazz was kind of a lot more prevalent, on radio stations, in music, in movies. It was pervasive in my childhood, and the 2 people that kind of introduced me to jazz were my older sister, Joy, who used to bring around jazz records to the house, and I would listen to them. And also my next door neighbor, a musician named Leon Biscara, who also, he played piano. He played jazz piano, and I would go over his house, and he taught me, like, I would consider these like my really first piano lessons. Like, he taught me Cantaloupe Island on the piano. He taught me Song for My Father. He taught me stuff that he, made up. I must have been about 11 or 12 or something when he started teaching me these things. I remember really taking to it. And so then I would run into people who were like jazz, enthusiasts. My sister's boyfriend knew a lot of the LA DJs, like there's a guy, Jay Rich, and another guy, Rick Holmes, that he knew and were friends, and they would bring over these albums, and I would just listen to them. It was almost like his house was a record store, and I could listen to all of these jazz albums, and that influenced me a lot.
So let me ask you that you start out on the keys at the age of 6. You've been at it for a long time. At 16, you went to the USC Community School of the Performing Arts, and pretty quick thereafter, you were in demand there in L.A. What happened? How did you fast-track all of this to a point where you were really out in front of people so early in your life?
Well, actually, I took lessons when I was 6. It kind of went in year one, out the like formal lessons. I didn't learn much, I don't think, except I did learn something. I learned how to finger a scale, and I learned, basically how to read music, like what the spaces were and the lines were and the treble and bass clef. I learned all of that. I'm in serious when I say, like, Leon gave me my first real piano lessons that I could use, that I enjoyed and that actually made me expand. But where the real expansion began was when I was 14. My parents sent me to a highly academically rated boarding school, which didn't have any of the social things that I was used to living at home, but had a piano there. For the first time I heard Keith Emerson, and that really made me, I said, a light bulb clicked, and I said, I want to do this for a living. And I started trying to learn his music by listening to it on a record and then going like kind of almost the length of a football field to the piano and just trying to remember and retain what I had just heard. And I developed my ear that way and also developed piano playing skills. I couldn't read at all. Then when it was evident that I wasn't making any progress academically at the school and my whole existence was music, my parents brought me back from age 16. They brought me back to L.A. and I just went to Hamilton High School, so public school here. But I took all kinds of piano lessons and I took classical piano lessons and theory lessons from the USC Community Schools. And that's kind of where I really had an incredible theory teacher, Marianne Usler, who kind of just taught me the basics of theory. And in that class I met Larry Klein too. We were both 16, and we just became friends. So then later on, I got so good and so advanced so quickly at theory that I was actually, in 2 years, I was actually able to qualify to go into USC as a composition and theory major, which I did. And then Larry he took a different path and started playing with a lot of people, but then he ended up playing with Freddie Hubbard, and he got me the gig with Freddie Hubbard, like my senior year in USC, and then later on when I graduated, I got the gig with Freddie. So that's kind of the story of how I got out there.
Being a part of a Freddie Hubbard outfit had to be a huge learning curve at that point in your life. How big was that for you?
It was huge. It's like I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you if it wasn't for Freddie Hubbard. Like Freddie Hubbard, he there's a lot of stories about how flawed he was, but nobody can deny that he's like at least one one of the 5 greatest trumpet players ever to play jazz. And one thing he was a very, when it came to music, he had integrity, incredible integrity in every regard, like not just music, not just like how good the music should be, but the importance of passing on the legacy of it. And what I mean by that is, like, he could have gotten a lot of piano players, to play with him, but he chose to have me, with him. And I think a lot of it had to do with, I was good enough to at least handle the gig, but also, and I would work for what he would pay, but more importantly, I think he felt a connection that he should be having somebody in his band who was young and who could, like, kind of pass on the legacy. I really believe that. And because he put up with, he was really extraordinarily patient with me in terms of, like, allowing me to grow musically in his group. I mean, I would screw up, and he would just sit there and let me screw up until I got it right, on stage, until if he couldn't stand it anymore, he'd turn around and say, lay out. But, so I learned everything from him.
And then you land your first record deal with Windham Hill Records in 1988. How big was that?
That was really big. I had met on one of these tours, I think we were playing a Russian River in San Francisco jazz festival, and I met Andy Norell, a steel drum player, on one of those tours. He was saying, yeah, man, I have this production group called Hip Pocket Records. Man, I'd like to produce you. I like your playing. And at that point, I didn't really pay much attention to him, But then I put out this record called Midland of a bunch of, like, just did it myself, of a bunch of, like, side A was a bunch of jazz tunes and kind of like funk tunes. And side B was, like, real ambitious. Like, there's 2 tunes, and they were, like, 11 minutes and 13 minutes of, like, real ambitious music. No improvisation, all composed. So I put out this record, and a friend of mine, Brandon Fields, gave me this list of record labels I could send it to. And one of them was Andy Norell's, which I didn't know at the time when I was sending. And he's the only one that said, yes, let's do something. And so he had a production company, kind of an imprint, with Windham Hill Jazz. And so I had like a 5-record deal with them, but I ended up doing 4. And it was really great. And that kind of put me on the map in terms of, like, it was the first representation of anything that was widely distributed. And so people knew who I was in other countries and, other, cities and stuff like that. And I could tour, I could get an agent and a manager and all of that. So it was good.
So over your career, things have obviously worked out very well. You've played with so many different people in different genres, from Yo-Yo Ma to Sting to the LA Philharmonic, Ron Carter, all these guys. How do you toggle all of these different genres and different levels of music? How does that work in your brain?
I don't know. I guess I just play or write what I feel is appropriate for the job at hand or the music at hand, and I base that on having listened to the person's or the style of music before, and they're just kind of approximating it, With Sting, it's pretty easy. I was playing with him with Chris Bodie's band. It was kind of, determined what his music was. I'd heard it, obviously, And with Yo-Yo Ma, he asked me to do an arrangement of a kind of a jazzed up arrangement of my favorite things, that featured him and Chris Bodie. So I just kind of like wrote what I thought was appropriate, what I thought. I guess I had a good instinct about it because they liked it, you know. So I don't know. I mean, it's a hard question to answer because I guess I love many genres of music and want to write in those genres and will do whatever genre or subgenre is appropriate for the situation.
You know, you've garnered a lot of awards too, many Grammys, many nominations, many things have happened over your career. Was there one award, not your favorite one, but was there an award that you got that kind of caught you off guard you didn't expect?
You know, well, yes. There's a few. Like, you never, like, just expect to win every award, you know. Like, my first Grammy nomination was a surprise, like a shock to my system. It was back in 1996, and it was for a song called The Starry Night, and the album had just been, like, you know, it was put out, and then about a month later, there was a regime change in the label, and then the album was just, like, dumped, like, no support or nothing, you know, so, and then, so I thought it was a dead issue, and then one of the songs from that album got nominated for a Grammy. And so that was kind of a shock. The major shock, though, was the Doris Duke Performing Artists Award. That one just came out of left field, and it was like the one that paid the most. I mean, it paid like a lot of money, and it actually kind of saved me from going into a financial hole, you know. And so it was a shock. It was like somebody from up there really, you know, like, likes me.
Nice. Let me ask you this. How do you feel about your career up to this point? You've seen a lot of action. You've been all over the place with your music, very prolific. How do you feel about your career?
I feel good. You know, I feel like, I mean, I'm happy with what I'm doing. You know, I just kind of sit down behind the piano and put your head down and get your pencil and your piece of paper and start scribbling on the paper. And you never look up to see if anybody's noticing, you know. And it's nice to know that people have noticed, you know. I remember there was this radio host, this talk radio host, and someone would say to him, "How are you doing?" And he said, "Better than most, not as good as some," you know. And I kind of feel like that, you know.
What's one of the best jazz shows you've ever seen live? One of those shows that really kind of opened up your mind a little bit more to jazz that you saw live?
Well, there are about 3 or 4 shows that have been seminal events in my life. I would have to say seeing the M1DC group, the Herbie Hancock group, as a 13-year-old kid at Shelley's Manhole was one. That had to be like 1970, maybe a 14-year-old, like 1971, seeing the M1DC group. Also seeing, much later, in 1989, seeing Pat Metheny's group at the Wiltern really kind of changed my whole conception of writing for a jazz ensemble. That was around the time he had just done Letter from Home. And so he had like those 3 albums, the First Circle, Still Life Talking, and Letter from Home. And then he did a lot of stuff from those albums and stuff from previous albums. And it just blew my mind, you know. It was like the balance of extraordinary playing, extraordinary compositions, extraordinary drama, mixed with this technical, the brilliance technically, like with the sound, with the lighting, with the drama of the music, you know, the singing, the percussion, Lyle Mays, you know, it made me really want to do that. So that was one. Also seeing George Duke and Billy Cobham with Alphonso Johnson and John Schofield in with that album, the Duke Cobham project. back in the 70s, I saw that. That was one. Return of Forever, seeing them at Royce Hall. It's a lot of them, you know.
Absolutely. So let me ask you a general question. As a practitioner of jazz, one that's dedicated your life to the craft, why do you love jazz?
Why do I love jazz? I really couldn't answer that. I mean, it's part of my DNA. I've heard it my whole life. It's like saying, why do you speak English? You know, you've heard it your whole life, and that's the language that you know. It's just part of my DNA. It's part of what makes me American, you know.
So what is one of the nicest things that a fan has ever said to you about your music?
Like, you've changed my life or something, and hopefully in a positive way. But, yes, you've changed my life. I think, or people have come up and cried, you know.
Yeah.
This is very meaningful to me. I have a friend, Morton Lauridsen, who wrote this, probably the most performed choral piece in the world right now, called Lux Aeterna. And it's an extraordinarily beautiful piece. It's unbelievably beautiful. And he got an email one time where he said that his piece stopped someone from committing suicide.
Wow.
So that's like a reward.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. Everything's going to come down to this question to get a little bit at the essence of who you are. Everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, those that you play live for. But when you wake up and face the world, who are you? Who do you think you are?
Who do you think you are?
Who do you think you are?
I can tell you who I think I am, and I don't know who I am. I wake up, I'm a man. You know, I'm a black man, you know. Then a father, you know, and a friend to many people, you know, an ex-husband, a brother to my sisters, a son to my parents who are no longer with me, you know. And, you know, then I'm a musician, you know. I'm a guy who, I don't know, I like to say I'm good at what I do and leave it at that.
I think that's a great way to wrap everything up. Billy, thank you for taking a minute to talk about your music, your life, and opening up. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the interview.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, L.A., and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Billy for his his stories, and all that music. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.